Hi everyone, welcome to another session of Pragati Vichar Literature Festival 2026. Today's theme is Curious Minds and Courageous Hearts. And the title of this session is Adventures Beyond the Lines. We have with us today in the panel Miss Riya, Miss Anushi, Miss Lavanya, and Miss Shahena. So Riya Malhotra shares a love-hate relationship with blank sheets of paper. She spends a lot of time just staring at them. But nothing brings her more joy than using such sheets to write stories that are stupendously silly and sometimes a little bit clever. Born and brought up in Bombay, with a voracious appetite for a company, Riya adores books and food in equal measure. She also has a twin brother, but luckily for him, he can't be consumed. Like most grown ups, she juggles many responsibilities, such as being an English and drama teacher, a freelance writer, actor, and a voiceover artist. This is the first book and a tiny piece of her heart. Handle both with care. We welcome you, Ria.
Thanks for having me.
Shahina Zaveri graduated with a BFA in illustration and now runs Zakara, a studio that creates graphic design, customized illustrations, and stationery. She draws inspiration from the kookiest of places, be it under the sea or over a petri dish. In her spare time, you can find her putting boundless energy to good use on the tennis courts. It's the only time the color pencils have been left at home. Hi, Shahina.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Lavanya Karthik is a writer, illustrator, and award winning nap taker. Her naps have taken her across the world, where she has had many adventures as a ninja, an evil mastermind, and a shark whisperer. When she's awake, she can be found in Mumbai planning her next nap. Hi, Lavanya.
Hi,
Welcome
thank
on
you for
board.
having me.
Anushi Mehta was born and raised in Antwerp, studied psychology and education in the UK, and began her career as a primary school teacher before moving to Bombay, which she now calls home. Her work sits at the intersection of storytelling, social impact, and pushing culture forward, whether building a conscious design led venture that centers craft and culture, writing children's books that explore identity and belonging, or contributing to platforms like Diverse Books. She has studied writing at institutions like BICAR and Writing Barn, and her projects reflect a holistic collective mindset aimed at shaping interconnected futures. Beyond writing and curation, she's an investor in a women led agriculture enterprise out of Ladakh and serves as a governor at DSB International School. Hi, Anushi.
Hello. Really happy to be here.
So, my first question, which is to the entire panel, is that all your books approach childhood differently through curiosity, music, family, and memory. When you begin a story for children, what comes first for you? The emotion, the idea, or the character?
Can I go first?
Please.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, for me, it's a mixture of things because I also illustrate. So sometimes the story begins with a character who pops up into my head, and then I want to know more. What is this person going to do? What are his or her issues? And then a story evolves. And sometimes it can just be a few words, that I put together. In the case of Blame It on the Uns, it was literally the word uns. And I was very curious to, make this, what would kids do with a word like this? And what kind of story could I, develop? So with me, it works both ways. Sometimes it's a visual, sometimes it's words.
That's wonderful.
I love that, Lavanya. I find that's so true. It's always a mix of things for me as well. Sometimes it is a character, but I'm not an illustrator. So I'm like, oh, perhaps but I don't picture the character necessarily in my head. But recently it's been a problem. I'm like, what if this were to happen? How would it be solved? Who would solve it? What would the journey to get to that destination B. That's one. And for Nikhail the crocodile specifically, I came up with the character because one of my dear friends had a son and she called the son Nikhail. And instantly I was like, oh my God, like a crocodile. And then I was like, what can I do with this character and how can I develop it? So yeah, it's story dependent, it's book dependent. Sometimes, as you said, a few words come to me as well. And then I just want to see where we can take them.
That's very nice.
I think for me, sometimes it can be anything. I mean, I don't necessarily write the story, but I think even if I had an idea, I could go to somebody who would write the story. But I think, like you said, it could be a word, it could be anything, it could be a concept, it could be like a sweet gesture that somebody did, like, that you kind of experience and you want to build around it and somehow create something around it. And I think in most creative fields, sometimes you struggle with an idea and then something random will happen and it'll just pop into your head and then you kind of build something off of that. So, yeah.
That's very beautiful.
Yeah, I think like Lavanya, Ria, and Shahena have said, I think inspiration comes all around. And I think the most beautiful moments for me are when I'm able to be vulnerable and porous to absorbing that. Because I feel a lot of times in life, we're just so focused on like getting through the day and like our routines. And so when I have this sort of openness, I think I'm able to see inspiration, and that kind of becomes like an amazing like starting point for things. I think for me also, like what's happened with my writing journey, I started writing about 6 years ago. There was initially this whole thing about like, let's break, let it be a way for me to see how we're all connected and sort of break some boundaries. And it was like a lot larger, but now actually, like, as I'm getting deeper into it, like the stories I want to write are just so much closer to me, closer to home. 𝐷𝐸𝐷 is literally like, actually, it's very much based on a true story. We had a caretaker whose name was 𝐷𝐸𝐷, and it's very much based on that. But yeah, so I think inspiration is all around. I think we just have to be open to receiving it.
That's very beautiful. So, my next question, which is again for the entire panel, is that many adults believe children need constant stimulation. How do you balance simplicity and depth in your work without underestimating the young readers?
Well, I always say I write for the child that I used to be, the 10-year-old or the 8-year-old. I am directly addressing that kid. And I also don't think children need stimulation. Sometimes I think what they need is boredom. I think that idle mind, when they have nothing to do, those lazy long afternoons, which was a privilege, I think, that we grew up with, my generation at least. I think that's what kids need, not stimulation. And of course, a mix of both, a mix of stimulation but mostly you want to create a space where a child is free to roam in their imagination and think wildly and think with abandon, and then perhaps act on that as well. I think when your imagination just goes places, it changes who you are as well. I think it changes what you think is possible, and what is possible for you as a person, who you can be, and how you can break out of whatever little box you may have put yourself into, the kind of person you are. I think all that can change just with a good book. So I think a mix of stimulation and a lot of boredom, and of course an endless like a field of imagination for a child to play.
That's very beautiful.
No, I agree. I agree. I think as a child, I was bored a lot. And I think it was one of the reasons you kind of have to find interesting ways on how to like entertain yourself. And it's kind of the same thing. It's just how you do it and how you look at it. It's not like you're doing anything extraordinary. So I think even at least when we're putting a book together, we're not giving you something you haven't seen, you haven't seen or you haven't heard before. It's just the language, the silliness, the idea of putting two things you don't necessarily see together to tell people how to think and kind of kind of show them or kind of show them why you don't necessarily have to associate things that are commonly associated together, and just open the way you kind of perceive the world. You're not teaching them anything new. You're just teaching them how to just change your perception and make your own life more interesting for yourself. It's not really about anything else.
And I think that's so true, Shaina. And she does a very good job. So Shaina and I create picture books together. And I think when you when you create a picture book, this concept of simplicity and depth helps because pictures tell so much of the story. So I think the depth comes from I don't like saying the word message, but from the story you're trying to tell. I don't think all books have to teach kids a message. I actually think they shouldn't necessarily. But as long as there's the takeaway, whatever that takeaway is, if there's depth to that and value to that, then the language you use and the way you communicate it needs to be simple and needs to not take itself too seriously. I think books that are didactic or moralistic, maybe that's where kids lose focus or attention. And also, they're not necessarily the kind of books that we to each their own. So in our work, I think the simplicity is in the language and the style, and the depth is perhaps in the value and attention to detail that Shaina puts into pictures. She is brilliant at doing that and conveying things that maybe I didn't even think of in my writing. But when she pictures the world, she brings out elements that, yeah, are just fun and detailed.
That's very beautiful.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm actually like when I'm writing for children, and I think this is a bit of a double-edged sword, is I really see them as an equal partner in this. I don't think I'm like writing to someone younger than me. So I don't resist with kind of pushing the boundary in what I'm trying to share and how deep and dark I'm going with certain things. But I think what I do in terms of my language and style and formatting and structuring is really stripped down. So a lot of my time goes in whittling down the language to what is like the lowest common denominator. How do I kind of get what I want to say? And then also like a lot with Dita, we spent a lot of time and had a great illustrator and worked in full collaboration to see how the illustrations could actually be not only supplementing the story, but really be shedding light or more color to something that, we didn't want to put words or put thoughts. So I think that's a really interesting interplay in picture books, which I really love to do. And I think when you have great illustrators who are willing to collaborate, I think that's where the magic really lies. So, in Dida, we really have gone to like this dark moment where Navya's so upset and she wants to cut out all her hair. And there was this big discussion that we had, like, should we go down that? Is this something we want to expose kids to? But I think also kids need to be seen in books, and sometimes things are not always happy. So I think, trying to balance things out is also important. So yeah.
That's very well put together. So my next question, which is again to the entire panel, is if a child revisits your book years later as an adult or a teenager, what do you hope they noticed or understand differently the second time around? Like, the one thing that you would want them to notice very differently as they would have as a child, and now that they're an adult. So, of course, that their perspectives have changed. So, what would they notice?
Shaina.
Okay, so I think for me, this is always something that I always go back to when we work and we illustrate books. I love to read children's books, and I think I like to read things where I read it for the first time and I go back and I always find something a second time round. And it's just that little bit of it. Like, so we always leave little things that kids probably wouldn't get, but adults would get in books, whether it's like in some sort of form or something like silly. And like, when you look back at it, you don't really recognize it as a child. But I think when you go back, and for me, that's the beauty of things. So you can revisit things all the time and find something a little different depending on your headspace. And I think we always take that into consideration when we kind of create books, because it's always like it's the same thing, but I've changed. So just my perspective of the world has changed, and how where you're at just now is the way you kind of see things around you.
She is a master of dropping Easter eggs into illustrations, and there's always lots of pop culture references of the time. There was specifically with certain characters and the way we portrayed them in 𝐏𝐈𝐿, a lot of gender fluidity. And I think it was coming at the time when the government was really cramping down on Section 377. And I think we wanted to at least let the parents spot things that kids will see as cute illustrations or not notice at all. And there's a scene about this fashion designer zebra, and there's messages written on each of the clothes, which the kids probably won't even notice, but the parents will. And there is a Elton John inspired pair of sunglasses and things that, yeah, will make sense when you get older. So we hope to get that in our story.
So, me and one of my closest friends, since the last 10 years, we've been gifting each other picture books. And I think there's something so, like we've been speaking about in this conversation, the simplicity, but the power of the message is something that sometimes, adult literature is not able to do in the same way. I think the best books are ones that really stand the test of time. And I think the way they do that is having something universal about them. And when you are reading them to your child, or your child is reading, or you are reading it, there's something in it for both of you. And so I guess the hope is really that even like the book sort of stands that test of time. And I think the way to do that is, again, like see the child as at eye level. And I think really the books that stay with you are those, and they still have a place in my library, and I still often turn to them when I'm having a low day, or I just need like something inspirational.
My next question is for Ria. 𝐏𝐈𝐿 is driven entirely by questions and exploration. What does curiosity mean to you as a writer? And why did you feel it was important to center an entire story around a child who refuses to stop asking questions?
I think that is not new. I think all kids don't ever stop asking questions. So I saw a universality in that. And I think as an author, what curiosity means to me, and I guess what it means to 𝐏𝐈𝐿 as well, is to really have a love for learning. And also not accept what you've been told. I think that's a big one. I think going out and finding answers for yourself, questioning things that you've been told or you don't understand or that interest you, is how wonderful stories are born and is how we grow and we develop. And I think the kinds of questions that we ask in the book are the kinds of questions that some purposely don't have answers, like what came first, the chicken or the egg? And does the zebra have black stripes on white or white stripes on black? But it's just they were all open-ended questions because I wanted parents to be able to ask the kids and open up their minds, and debate on issues, because there aren't any right answers. And that's okay. The fun is in questioning, poking, prodding, coming up with ideas, challenging those ideas. And kids do that every day, all the time, 24/7. My best friend has 3 children. I have none of my own. And she doesn't have a moment's peace. And when I'm in the house, it's the most charming thing ever, because then I leave after 3 hours. But I was also trying to think about how, yeah, maybe giving parents a structure in which to do that and in which kids can engage. And I just thought it was something that children do so much all the time. It is about a child who asks questions, but it also is about knowing when to ask and perhaps when to take a step back. I think that's another important thing in the book. Yeah. And I hope I hope that's what it does. I hope it just inspires children to look at the natural world around them and be curious about it and want to know more.
But children are always asking like tons of questions. Like I remember when I was a kid, I was always very curious about even for the smallest of facts, that why the sky is blue, let alone
Yeah.
any other thing.
Yeah.
But don't you think like leaving open-ended questions is actually, um I don't know how to put it, but just putting a spark, or maybe uh, poking them a little way too much by giving them open-ended questions. As a child, it would like infuriate them.
So I think, yeah, fair. I think what's lovely about a picture book, especially for the ages of 3 to 6, they are being read to by an adult. So the
Ah.
open-ended question is being posed by the book, but there is an adult there to finish that conversation or close that loop with them. So I hope not to just throw them in the deep end and leave them questioning, but to have a topic of discussion, and then it's up to the caregiver or the reader of the book to figure out how they want to navigate that conversation.
Yeah, that's very lovely. Perfectly curated.
Thank
So
you.
my next question is for Shahina, that your illustrations take readers across very different landscapes and moods. How do you use visual storytelling to guide a child's curiosity without overwhelming them with detail?
I think when it comes to visuals, it's always nice to have a balance. Like sometimes you can have things that are kind of all over the place and coming out of everything. But I think, like in life, I think when you're overstimulated, you kind of cut off half of it to just pick up on the things that you like. But I think in a picture book, I think you have to be excited to see something new on every page. I mean, I don't think it should kind of have the same language and the same tone. Yes, even if it is sort of in one story and you're kind of moving in one direction, you kind of want to like look at this and be like, oh wow, like what's next? And I want to see what you kind of see. And I think in this book, it kind of depends on the tone of his emotions. So on days where like he's excited and there's lots to look out for, there's a lot of color and a lot of detail. And then on days where like he's kind of sad or like he's kind of dim, the whole lighting is dim and it's kind of more monotone and it's kind of, and then there are days where it's completely quiet and we've kind of made a coloring page because it's just dead and it's just like spots on a page where like the kids get in and they get to color. What I also think is nice is we've kind of made the book a tangible object where it's not you flipping pages and going in one direction. You turn the page upside down, you turn the book upside down, you turn it vertically, you turn it horizontal. So you're kind of flipping this thing around where you're learning the story and interacting with a tangible object where you're not just simply just going page after page, but you're trying to explore this book while figuring the story out, which is nice because I think today it's nice for kids to have some kind like tactility. I think is getting lost because kids are always looking at a screen or like and kind of pressing buttons to kind of go from one place to another, but not physically and not really doing anything. So it's kind of nice to kind of play around with the form of a book in that sense where you really engage with this object and you kind of have to like flip it around and do sorts of things. And that also goes along with the story of where you're kind of headed. So we've kind of used that in order to communicate different ideas. And sometimes it's like a subtle and honestly the simplest of things. But again, it's how you perceive things and you use that simple way of understanding to kind of translate into something. It's like the tiny charming things that I think make all the difference in the world. So I think it's just that and you're trying to incorporate silly little simple things into just explaining things. So I think that's my favorite part of the process.
But also perception. Sorry to jump in.
Mhm.
This is our second book together. And in the first book, everything was a very pretty picture, but I think we saw everything head on. And in this one, we're trying to see things from the crocodile's perspective, from up his snout, from down below. You see only his eyes when he looks at small animals. You see him off the page when he's looking at a giraffe who's so big that it can't fit. And China is really good at coming up with those kinds of different viewpoints as well.
That's very beautiful. And China, you've put it very, very, very beautifully that, it is very important to give children something to actually, something tangible in their hands other than a phone screen. because nowadays and it's not just children, it's adults as well. Like
For sure.
everyone is always on the screen.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very important for the caregivers or the parents to, inhibit that habit in children from the very, very, very beginning. Not like when they cannot, but since the time the child can actually hold a book and understand what is there in the book, it's very important to give them the book and make them sit and read it at least. If not read it, just see the book. Because I think over time the culture of books is I won't say it's getting lost, because the people who love books still love books, but I think the importance is getting lost of the culture of books. My next question is for Lavanya. Your book uses music and group dynamics to talk about teamwork and conflict. Why did you choose music as the lens to explore collaboration? And what do you hope children learn about working together through this story?
Well, a little background. This book, Blame It on the Uns, is part of a series commissioned by HarperCollins. And each book had to have a specific theme. So it's called the POFS series. So it stands for pets, other animals, family, friends, and school. So I was given the F for friends. And the first thing I thought about was how difficult it is to make friends. When you are, there's always the conception that it's very, you sit down next to someone on the bus and you start talking, and 15 years later you're still good friends. But sometimes you have these more prickly characters who, for various reasons, just don't seem to have any friends around them. And I said, what would happen if you had a person like this? And I also remembered my childhood struggles with group work, which I in the book is turned into a crocodile. I've always struggled with groups because, if you're with your friends, it's great. But if you're with complete strangers who you can't work well with, there's always this struggle to get work done. And so I wanted to explore that. I said, so a book about friendship, about people who are definitely not friends with each other, and the slow growth of all these characters. And by the end, they are themselves surprised that they've turned into friends. So these were the dynamics I wanted to work with. And music was fun. And as I said, the word uns had piqued my interest, my curiosity. I wanted to play around with it. And I said, all right, let's put some beatboxing into it. And the other theme about it is that everything in life has music. There's a rhythm to everything, including friendship, even including rivalry. Sometimes there's a rhythm to the way you interact with, people that you like, people that you're constantly fighting with. And those are also explored, the rhythms of everything that we have, and how we sometimes fall into rhythm. We learn how to fall into that rhythm and become friends or become rivals, whatever. That's what the book explores. So it's about literally the uns that keeps us all, in the beat.
That's very beautiful. So, my next question is for Anushi. Dida focuses on memory, rituals, and a deeply intimate relationship when writing such an emotionally layered story for children. How did you decide what to explain directly and what to trust young leaders to feel on their own? That's tricky.
So, I write across various genres. I've written a few picture books, I've written a chapter book, and I've written a middle grade novel. They're not out yet. And I've also explored fiction and nonfiction. And what I realized as a pattern for me as a writer was that even within nonfiction, like the priority for me was like to kind of find that emotional depth, or like to go on this discovery process of what would Savitribai Phule be feeling, or what would those girls, that she was trying to educate be feeling at that time, or Humayun Viarawala, which is another photojournalist, the first woman photojournalist of India who captured the independence movement. What would she have been feeling? So I think that emotional resonance is kind of where I personally feel I'm most drawn to and I'm most curious about. How I try to do it is, so it starts there, like as a discovery. And then I think it's just about a lot. So Dida is 6 years in the making. It was acquired 6 years ago. And then, for multiple reasons, it kind of just got delayed. But each time we've looked at editing, I think there's been a growth and a change and a shift. So even that expanse of time has really helped with allowing the story to simmer, mature. So I really believe in like now kind of giving my stories time to simmer and then simplifying the words, the language as much as I can, looking at rhythms, patterns, routines, because rather than naming the emotion, that's something I feel like I steer away from doing. I try to see how do I bring it through the descriptions or just the storytelling and even the visuals. Like the illustrator plays a huge role in this. But without making it super in your face, like, okay, now like the character is sad. Like, it doesn't need to be so, but really like how are we describing things around and really empowering the reader to make their own assessment of what they want to feel at that time. So I think that's really for me an exciting journey to kind of bring the reader along and also like for each person to have a slightly different experience with the story. So I think it's like allowing it to simmer, multiple rounds of edits, the illustrations, I think it's multiple things that come into play.
That's very beautiful and actually very correct as well. And I completely agree with you that few things have to be left for kids to understand themselves and figure out what they want to feel. So that's very beautifully written and very beautifully articulated. And this marks the end of our session, guys. Thank you so much. It was a very, very, very wonderful session. I really loved it. And yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.